Hey, and welcome back. And in this lesson, we are going to look at lights, adding lights to your scene. So first of all, we're going to delete everything in the scene, start with a blank scene. So simple way to do that is press A on your keyboard to select everything, and then X to delete, and then click to confirm. So now we have a blank scene. Just something else I want to mention about the 3D cursor. So the 3D cursor will always be the origin of a new object that you're adding to your scene. So if we have, for instance, if we move this 3D cursor to the side and we create a new, maybe a new cube, it's going to create that cube where that 3D cursor is. So that's why most of the time all your new objects that you create will be in the center, because the 3D cursor is in the center of your world. So anyway, we're going to create a plane or a ground plane first for our scene. So I'm going to press Shift A, Mesh, and then Plane. Now the plane is literally just a flat face, as you can see. It doesn't have any thickness, so we're going to use that as our floor. And I'm going to scale that up. So with that plane selected, I'm going to press S and then just drag it out so we have a bigger plane, something like that. And now I want to add a cube on top of this plane. So I'm going to press Shift A again, Mesh, and this time we're going to select Cube. Now you can see that our cube is not sitting on top of the plane, it's kind of in the center of it, and we want to move this cube up. So I'm with this cube selected, I'm going to press G for grab, and then Z for Z or Z axis, and then I'm going to hold in Control to snap, and you can see there it's snapping, and I'm going to snap it right to the top, on top of that plane, click, and now you can see that our cube is sitting exactly on that plane. So next I want to add a light. So you can either add a light by going up to Object and then, Add, and then add lights here. Or the normal way we always do it is Shift A, the shortcut, and then we're going to go to Light, and then you'll see you have some different options. You've got Point, Sun, Spot, and Area. So we're going to look at Point first. So I'm going to click Point, and it's going to create that light inside this cube now because it's creating it on that 3D cursor. So I want to move that light up a little bit. So I'm going to press G, and then I'm going to press Z to move it in the Z axis, like that. And now I want to move it over to the side. So I'm going to press G again, and then Y for the Y axis. Maybe let's put it somewhere there. And yeah, we can't really see anything, but our light is there. So let's quickly talk about these different views in Blender again. The first one, if you look right at the top next to X-ray, so that will be the X-ray. So if we look at the one next to it, the little wireframe one, this one is a wireframe view. So if I click on this, you'll see everything is wireframe. You're not going to see any materials or any lights or anything like that. The second one is the one we usually work in, and that's solid mode. So if I click on this, you'll see everything solid. It's also not going to show you something like a shadow or a reflection or a material or anything like that. And the next one we have is material preview mode. So if I click on this, this one will actually show materials. So it's like a way that you can preview how your objects will look. You'll see the different colors of those objects, and if they have materials, you'll see those materials. But again, we don't see any shadows or reflections or anything like that. And then the last one is our render preview. So if I click on this render preview, it's going to go into kind of like a weird gray look because we don't really have set any properties to this light, so it's not very bright. But you'll be able to see shadows and reflections and everything inside this render preview mode. Now, just remember that in Blender, you have different renderers that you can use. So the two main ones are called Eevee and then also Cycles. Eevee and Cycles. We're not really going to use Workbench. So Eevee is a real-time renderer, which is kind of similar to something that Unreal and Unity and all of those applications use. It's a very, very fast renderer, but it doesn't give you 100% accurate results as in the real world. So in this course, we are not really going to focus on the Eevee renderer. We are going to focus on the Cycles renderer, which is the kind of better renderer. In my case, it's a lot slower than Eevee, but it's going to give you accurate results. So whenever you want to go with something photorealistic or something just really, really nice and realistic, you will always use the Cycles render engine. But you can still get some really, really nice renders by using Eevee, but it does require a little bit of extra work to kind of fake some of your reflections and some of your shadows. So I'm going to change this from Eevee to Cycles, and you can instantly see that something is happening. We can kind of see a shadow forming here as this is rendering. My computer is slowing down a lot, so I am just going to go to Performance, and I'm going to change the threads to 2. So it's only using 2 CPU threads, so it's going to be a little bit slower, but that's fine. So as you can see, if I'm moving this around, it goes all pixelated, and that's because we're trying to render that image using this render preview. So now with this light selected, I'm going to go to the light properties. So once you click on your light, you'll see a little light bulb appear here in this icon section. So if I click on this light icon, you can see we have all this light properties here. So first of all, you can see color, which is white, power, size, and max bounces. So let's increase the power. So as you can see, currently the power is set to 10 watt, and I'm going to click there. I'm going to change this to 200. So just type in 200, enter, and now you can see our light is a lot brighter. You can see it's actually reflecting off this floor, off this plane, and I can also see that we are getting some nice shadow from this cube. And if I just rotate my scene, you can see it's going to go all pixelated again, and it's going to start to try and render that scene again for me. And you can see it's looking pretty cool. So let me just zoom in here slightly so we have a little bit of a better view, something like that. So let's change the color of this light. So I can click on this color, and let's say we want to make it a little bit more blue. So I can just drag this into the blue area, and instantly you can see our light is now blue. And it's obviously affecting the look of the other objects in our scene because they're all white. And we can also increase the power maybe. Let's make it 400 watts. You can see that's brighten it up a bit. And then we have the size. So the size is basically the size of your light. And the size of your light will affect the way shadows look. So if I make this smaller, I'm going to set this to 0.1, press enter, and you can see our shadow is a little bit sharper. So the edges of our shadow is a little bit sharper. That's a bit sharper. We can even take it smaller, maybe make it 0.01, enter. And now you can see we have this very, very sharp shadow because our light source is very, very small. If I make this bigger, I'm going to click and I'm going to make this 0.5, so half a meter. Now you can see our shadow is a lot softer again. So I can even increase this maybe to 1 meter. And now you can see our shadow will be nice and soft. So we also get a different few types of lights, as I showed you when we pressed Shift A and then light. You have these different options, but you can change them within the properties of that existing light. So you can click on your light, and then in the light properties, you can change them between point, sun, spot, and area. So let's change this one to a spotlight. We're going to get back to sun. So click on spot, and you'll see it's going to change the way this light looks in your scene, and it's going to create this spotlight. So now I can click on this light, and we can rotate it. So maybe we want to rotate it in the x-axis. So I'm going to press R, and then X to lock it to that axis. And now you can kind of point it exactly where you want to point that light. You can also click and drag this yellow dot. So you can just literally drag this around in your scene to drag it to a very specific location like that. You can also change the power. You can also change the size. So everything else is still exactly the same. Don't worry too much about max bounces. This is probably just a way that the renderer will work out where the light's going to bounce and how many times it's going to bounce. So usually I just leave that default. You can also enable cast shadow. If you don't want to cast a shadow for some reason, you can take that off or enable that again. So let's look at sun. So I'm going to click on sun, and you're going to see how our scene is going to brighten up quite a bit. So currently the strength is on 400 because we are at 400 watt. But this is very different to that 400 watts of a point in a spotlight. So I'm going to set this down to 1. And usually a low number is pretty good for a sun. And as you can see, that our sun is giving us a very, very sharp shadow right there. So you can also then change the angle. So this will be the angle of that sun, and that will affect the shadow density, or if the shadow is sharp or soft. So that's the angle of that sun. So obviously we can increase and decrease the strength. You can maybe make it 2, and that's going to be a lot brighter. And then you can also just drag this yellow dot around in your scene to set that angle of how the sun is actually affecting your scene. Now lastly, let's look at area. So I'm going to click on area. An area light is going to create like this flat plane almost. And I'm just going to drag this yellow so it's kind of pointing in the direction of our cube. And now you can see we can change the shape of our area light. So you can, if you click on this drop down, you get square, rectangle, disc, and ellipse. So this is square, so rectangle, you can change it to rectangle, or disc, which is like a flat round disc, as you can see there. Or you can change this to ellipse, and that will create an ellipse. So this is just different kind of shapes. So I'm going to set this back to disc. And then we need to increase the power. Currently it's set to 2 watts. So I'm going to change this to maybe 400. And I can see it will just kind of affect your scene differently. You can see this fall off of this light is looking a little bit different than spotlight or point light. And you can obviously also increase the size and decrease the size to change the way that your shadows look. So let's create one more light. So I'm going to press Shift A, light, and this time I'm just going to create a point light again, and I'm going to move it up. So G and then Z to move it up on the Z axis, and then we are going to press G and Y to move it in the Y axis, maybe to this side. And let's change the color of this light to, let's make it red. And then I want to increase the power as well. So let's make this one 500. Now you can see we are mixing these two colors together. So we've got the blue light coming from this side. I'm just going to make this blue kind of more dark blue. And you can see the red light coming from this side, and the way those shadows are actually changing. So that is how easy it is to add lights to your scene inside of Blender. Play around and create some different scenes and add some interesting looking lights to your scene, and just see how they affect the way your scene looks. In the next lesson, we are going to talk about HDR eyes, which is quite a cool way of introducing some very realistic lights into your scene. I'll see you in the next lesson.